These hieroglyphs describe the last generation. In the basement of the Cairo Museum, behind catalog number JE89289, there is a limestone block that has not been on public display since 1973. It measures just over 4 feet across. One face is carved with a hieroglyphic register that does not match any known scene from the standard Egyptian religious canon. When a visiting epigrapher from the University of Chicago photographed it in 1973, she noted in writing that the beings depicted in that register had no equivalents in any dynastic text she had encountered in 20 years of fieldwork. Her note still exists. The photograph still exists. The block still exists. What does not exist is a single peer-reviewed paper dedicated to what is carved on it. And that is only the first problem. Because across 3 separate ancient traditions, Egyptian, Babylonian, and the banned texts the church tried to bury for 17 centuries, there is a sequence of signs described. Not a vague list of omens. A precise, ordered catalog of observable changes in the physical world. The ground, the sky, the birds, the stars, the ocean. Those signs are described as marking one specific moment in history, the last generation before judgment. When you lay those ancient descriptions next to what has been measured, recorded, and filed away in scientific datasets over the past 25 years, something becomes very difficult to dismiss. Not because of what the texts believe, but because of what they knew, specifically, measurably, in languages written 3,000 years before the instruments existed to verify them. That sequence begins in Egypt, in a sealed chamber, on a block of limestone they buried underneath their oldest monument and never brought back up. If that's the kind of history that keeps you up at night, subscribe right now. Every week this channel follows the catalog numbers, the archived field reports, and the footnotes that never make it into the mainstream conversation. Hit the bell so you don't miss what comes next. This is what the hieroglyphs say about the last generation. The block designated JE89289 was excavated in 1971 from a sealed subsidiary chamber beneath the Saqqara necropolis by Dr. Jean-Philippe Lauer, considered among the foremost authorities on the site. His field notes, preserved at the French National Center for Scientific Research in Paris, describe the chamber as predating the surrounding step pyramid complex, not by years but by centuries, placing its construction before the accepted beginning of dynastic Egypt. The Cairo Museum cataloged the block in 1974 as pre-dynastic ceremonial relief, provenance uncertain. No dedicated iconographic study has been published in the 50 years since. The beings depicted on JE89289 are labeled with a compound hieroglyphic glyph that Egyptologists have translated provisionally as those who came before the counting of years. In hieroglyphic convention, compound glyphs of that grammatical construction are not poetic flourishes. They are precise, categorical designations. The Egyptians used them to name specific classes of beings, specific offices, specific cosmic roles. This glyph does not appear anywhere in the formal dynastic canon. But the physical description of the beings it labels does appear elsewhere in 3 separate locations across 2 continents, recorded by civilizations with no known contact with one another. The carved register on JE89289 depicts a construction sequence, not a religious offering scene, not a funerary procession. A construction sequence, showing figures directing the placement of large rectangular stone forms using instruments that do not correspond to any tool in the documented Egyptian archaeological record. One instrument appears repeatedly throughout the register, a rod with a forked terminus, held at a precise downward angle by each figure shown using it. For decades, researchers who encountered this image in Lauer's documentation assumed it was a ritual object. The object was classified as unknown, the image was filed, and inquiry stopped. That assumption rested on a comparison set that was missing a critical data point. In 2000, Dr. Klaus Schmidt published a field report on his excavations at Göbekli Tepe in southeastern Turkey, already recognized as the oldest known ritual complex on Earth, predating the Egyptian pyramid complex by at least 7,000 years. Among the carved limestone pillars, Schmidt documented Pillar 43. In his field notes, he logged one recurring abstract element, a forked rod held at a downward angle by a figure rendered without a head. He citos as an unidentified cultic implement and moved on. There is no evidence in any published record that Schmidt was ever aware of. JE89289 in the Cairo Museum basement. He was not looking for a parallel. He found one anyway. In 2017, Dr. Robert Schoch presented an analysis at the Geological Society of America that included a geometric observation about Pillar 43's carved implements. The forked rod appears multiple times, and in every instance is rendered at a consistent downward angle of 33 degrees from horizontal. What his presentation did not include, because the comparison had not yet been made in any published forum, was that the forked implement on JE 89289 in Cairo appears at the same angle, 33 degrees. Two sites, 7,000 years, 2,000 kilometers. No known cultural transmission pathway connecting them. Then there is the biological evidence, which is where this stops being purely archaeological. In 2019, a genomics team led by Dr. Eske Willerslev at the University of Copenhagen published a landmark ancient DNA study in Nature Communications covering 166 individuals from pre-dynastic and early dynastic Egyptian burial sites. Its main findings were widely reported. What was not reported was Table S7. 4 individuals from a pre-dynastic burial layer at Saqqara, the same complex where JE 89289 was found, carry a Y chromosome haplogroup variant that does not resolve into any known branch of the human lineage, tree. The paper's authors flagged it as a possible sequencing artifact in a single line. No follow-up analysis was conducted, no separate paper was published. The burial layer those 4 individuals came from sits directly beneath the subsidiary chamber where Lauer's team found the carved block in 1971. 3 independent lines of evidence, architectural iconography, geometric cross-site analysis, and genomic data converge on the same physical location, the same stratigraphic layer. The mainstream explanation accounts for any one of these in isolation. It does not account for all 3 converging on the same spot. The compound glyph translated as "those who came before the counting of years" is not imprecise language. That grammatical construction labels a category. The Egyptians were not writing poetry. They were filing a designation for something they considered a distinct class of being, distinct enough to require a new compound glyph. Distinct enough to carve onto a block they then sealed inside a chamber beneath their oldest monument complex and left there. Now a second limestone fragment brings this closer to a mechanism. Catalog number JE 98944. Excavated from a shaft tomb at Saqqara in 1954 under Ahmed Fakhri, who described it in his field notes as a mechanism of unknown industrial purpose. The official registry entry, amended in 1971 under a different administration without new analysis, describes the same fragment as decorative funerary art. Fakhri's field notes exist in a separate archive with no cross-reference flag. A researcher looking at the official entry has no reason to know they say something different. The standard translation of the glyph sequence produces a phrase interpreted as the great lifting of the house of Ptah, but Fakhri's field notes record something the standard translation omits. Attached to the glyph sequence is a determinative, a classifier symbol scribes use to indicate the grammatical category of a word. Determinatives do not get transliterated. They are frequently the first thing lost when a translation moves from primary source to published summary. The determinative Fakhri documented appears in only one other confirmed location in the entire hieroglyphic corpus, a papyrus from Deir el-Medina in a text describing tools brought to a specific construction site. Not a religious dedication. An inventory entry. The determinative changes the grammatical category of the entire phrase. It is not a spiritual act. It is a physical object. Embedded in that object's description is a word that appears 3 times in Old Kingdom administrative texts, referring to devices used at quarry sites and nowhere in funerary or devotional literature. The closest cognate in related Semitic root structures carries a meaning several researchers have noted but no one has formally published: the thing that turns. In 2003, a materials analysis team from the University of Liverpool examined tooling marks on interior contact faces of granite casing stones at the Giza Eastern Cemetery, surfaces never visible once construction was complete. They found parallel grooves consistent in depth to within 0.22 millimeters, arranged in a helical pattern. Helical cut marks require rotational force. Rotational force applied to granite at that scale and consistency, using the hand tools available in 2500 BCE, is not reproducible under controlled experimental conditions. The pitch of the helical pattern matches the mechanical specifications of an Archimedean screw adapted for compression rather than fluid movement. Dr. Christopher Dunn, a precision machinist, submitted an analysis to the Journal of Egyptian Archaeology in 1998. The submission was declined without stated cause. The limestone relief names a rotating device. The granite blocks carry the marks that device would leave. Those 2 facts sit in separate archives in separate disciplines and have never been formally connected in any published paper. Hammamat inscription, 87, dated to approximately 2000 BCE, records an expedition that brought back what the text specifically identifies as the complete mechanism of the House of Ptah, the same phrase, the same grammatical structure as the device named on JE 98944. The final line states the mechanism was placed beneath the House of the Horizon. In Old Kingdom topographical language, that phrase refers specifically to the Giza Plateau. The inscription does not record what happened after that. It records only that the mechanism arrived. Beneath the Giza Plateau, ground-penetrating radar by the Scan Pyramids project identified anomaly G7 beneath the Khafre Causeway, approximately 9 meters in its longest dimension. Sitting at a precise point along the route Hammamet inscription, 87 records the mechanism traveling. It was identified. It was logged. It was not excavated. The Egyptian Ministry of Antiquities has classified the corridor as a protected zone since 2018. No excavation permits for G7 have been granted. The limestone above it has not been touched. A fragment of parchment, no bigger than a business card, sits in Vault 7B at the Israel Museum in Jerusalem. Catalog number 4, Q 203. The Book of Enoch was removed from the Bible by the Council of Laodicea in 364 CE. For 17 centuries, banned, hidden, called too dangerous for Christian teaching. When archaeologists discovered the Dead Sea Scrolls at Qumran in 1947, 11 separate copies of Enoch turned up. More copies than were found of Deuteronomy. More than Exodus. More than most books that stayed in the Bible. The church removed a text the ancient world preserved more carefully than the books it kept. Scholars who translated the oldest fragments found something the church never wanted discussed. Enoch names a class of beings who descended to earth before the flood, records what they taught, and describes their prison. Fragment 4, Q 203, at the shrine of the book contains 12 lines of chapter 10 in Aramaic, carbon dated to 150 BCE. The complete text exists in Ge'ez manuscripts preserved by the Ethiopian Orthodox Church at Aksum. Dr. Michael Knibb, whose 1978 Oxford translation remains the standard edition, identified chapter 21 as the most specific description of angelic imprisonment in any ancient Jewish text. Chapter 21-7 uses the Ge'ez term mechanis, place of binding. Not metaphorical binding, physical restraint. Chapter 21:10 provides the depth measurement, 70,000 leagues downward from the place where heaven and earth meet. A league in ancient measurement equals approximately 3 miles. 70,000 leagues is 210,000 miles. The Earth's core is 3,958 miles down. Enoch is describing something far deeper than the planet itself. The number is too specific to be symbolic. Chapter 10 names the first prisoner, Azazel, chief of the fallen angels, who taught humanity weapon-making, metallurgy, cosmetics, and sorcery bound hand and foot, covered with jagged rocks, left there until the day of judgment. Chapter 10:11 names the second. Shemiaza, leader of the 200 watchers who descended to Mount Hermon, produced the Nephilim, and organized the rebellion. His sentence is 70 generations underground in ancient reckoning, 2,100 years. The binding occurred before the flood. That sentence should have ended around the time of Christ. Chapter 69 names the full roster. Barakel taught astrology, Kokabeel the constellations, Ezekiel, meteorology, Arakiel, geology, Shamsiel, solar cycles, Sariel, lunar phases, Penamu, the art of writing, Kazdeja, knowledge of the womb, Gadriel, the making of weapons, Ramael, divination, each one named for the domain of knowledge they transmitted. The pattern reads less like mythology and more like a case file. But there is a second prison Enoch describes, distinct from the chambers beneath the desert. Chapter 17 records Enoch being taken to a place beyond the Great Sea where the waters above and below converge. Verse 7 describes the floor as dark stone, smooth and cold, unlike any stone found on land. Enoch is describing basalt, the volcanic rock that forms the ocean floor. No ancient human had seen it. The deepest any person could dive was perhaps 100 feet. The ocean floor sits 2 miles down on average. Yet Enoch describes it accurately. Chapter 18-9 describes columns of fire descending without end, hydrothermal vents shooting superheated water at up to 750 degrees Fahrenheit. The ancients called them pillars of fire. We call them black smokers. Same phenomenon, different century. Beyond the pillars of fire, Enoch describes a great house built from compressed ice with walls of fire and a door he could not open. Chapter 19-1 identifies what is inside. The angels who cohabited with women, their spirits still active and able to influence events on the surface even while their forms are sealed below. Chapter 19-3 adds a detail most Western translations drop. The Ge'ez says their imprisonment is le'alam, for ages upon ages. Not a holding cell, a permanent installation. And then there is the detail. The standard English editions strip out entirely. The door has no handle on the outside. It can only be opened from within. Whatever is inside is not trying to get out, or it cannot. Either way, the door was not designed for a visitor. It was designed for a warden. This prison, Enoch records, will not be opened until the judgment. And then he describes what precedes the judgment. In a vault in the British Museum, there is a Sumerian clay tablet excavated from ancient Nippur in 1899. It spent 31 years in a storage crate before being catalogued, then decades more on a shelf, until doctoral candidate Dr. Maria Voss pulled it in 2004 as comparative material for her dissertation on Sumerian omen literature. What she found was not what she expected. The vast corpus of Mesopotamian divination tablets are written in conditional form. If the moon is surrounded by a halo, the king will die. The Anzu fragment uses no conditional constructions at all. Its grammar is the grammar of testimony. The author is not forecasting. The author is remembering. The text describes in sequence observable changes in the natural world, geological, atmospheric, celestial, that preceded what the author calls, in Voss's translation, the day the upper deep opened. The Sumerian compound, an Abzu-Bala, does not appear in any other known tablet. An is sky. Abzu is the primordial deep, the subterranean ocean beneath the world. Bala means to turn over, to open from below upward. The sky does not open from above. It opens from beneath. The observable changes the tablet records number 9. The first, water rising without rain. Ground that had held firm for generations, becoming soft without weather to explain it. Sinkholes appearing in stable terrain without rainfall. Preconditions have increased by over 200% since 2000. The second, birds flying without direction, falling from a clear sky. In September 2020, an estimated 1 million migratory birds fell dead across the American Southwest. Autopsies found no pathogen, no toxin, only internal signs consistent with acute disorientation. The event repeated in 2021 and again in 2023. No consensus explanation exists in the ornithological literature. The third, the ground speaking at night. Low-frequency vibration felt before it is heard. Beginning in 2011, unexplained low-frequency hums have been documented in Windsor, Ontario, Taos, New Mexico, and across the British Isles. The hum in Windsor was registered on instruments. Its source was never identified. The fourth, the sun arriving in the wrong position. In 2008, Inuit elders submitted testimony to the Canadian government that the sun was rising in a different position than it had for the entirety of living memory. The submission was filed. No response was issued. The fifth, the stars moving within a single generation. In 2011, the FAA updated runway designations at Tampa International Airport because magnetic north had shifted enough to render compass-based identifiers inaccurate. Airports in Europe followed. The rate of magnetic north's movement has accelerated from roughly 10 kilometers per year in the early 20th century to over 50 kilometers per year in the last decade. The sixth, ocean waters becoming hostile to life. Massive die-offs. Fish floating on surfaces that had been productive within living memory. Ocean dead zones have quadrupled in total area since 1950. The seventh, light appearing in the sky where it does not belong. In May 2024, auroras were visible across the continental United States, Mexico, and as far south as northern South Africa regions, with no historical record of such displays. The eighth, the sky wrong in a way that could not be named precisely but was felt by everyone. In 2016, 2019, and 2022, independent surveys of indigenous communities across the Arctic reported consistent accounts of the sun rising, in positions that did not match what previous generations had observed. The ninth change is the shortest entry in the sequence. The author writes fewer words for it than for any of the others, as if by the time this sign arrived, there was less left to it, e.g. splain. The Sumerian reads, "The protection above is torn, and the fire from beyond reaches the ground. The magnetosphere has measurable holes." That is not a figure of speech. The European Space Agency Swarm mission has tracked the growth of what researchers call the South Atlantic Anomaly, a region of severely weakened magnetic shielding, stretching from southern Africa across the Atlantic to South America. The anomaly is growing and split into two lobes, a development that was not expected at this stage. Satellites passing through it experience unexplained electronic failures at a rate 3 times higher than elsewhere. In 2023, satellite operators reported a 300% increase in unexplained system failures compared to baseline years. The tablet says the ninth sign marks the point at which the sequence is no longer approaching. The author's phrasing in the original is closer to, "What follows cannot be turned." 8 of the 9 signs are documented in the past tense across multiple scientific disciplines. The ninth is present tense, active and growing. Now stand back from the individual pieces and look at what 3 ancient traditions, separated by geography and language and centuries, all agree on. They agree that a class of beings was present before recorded human history, possessing advanced knowledge that should not have existed at the time. The Egyptians sealed their image underground and labeled them those who came before the counting of years. Enoch named them the Watchers and cataloged each one's domain. The Babylonian author, writing from memory after the day the upper deep opened, described a population whose forbidden knowledge preceded the catastrophe. They agree those beings were imprisoned after a specific event that altered the surface of the world. They agree a sequence of observable physical changes in the ground, the birds, the stars, the ocean, the sky, the magnetic field would precede the end of the current age. And they agree the generation witnessing those changes will not assemble them into a complete picture. Not because the information is unavailable, but because each piece will be explained in isolation, filed under its respective category, and never formally connected. That is precisely what has happened. The seismic anomalies are in the geological literature, the bird die-offs are in ornithology, the magnetic drift is in geophysics, the aurora extensions are in space weather data, the ocean dead zones are in marine biology. Each discipline has its data. No single framework has assembled them into the sequence the ancient authors recorded in order, not because no one has noticed, because every attempt to assemble them gets classified as speculation. The groove marks at Giza are in the Society for Egyptian Archaeology conference record. The submission analyzing them was declined by the Journal of Egyptian Archaeology without stated cause. Fragment 4, Q 203, sits in Jerusalem under glass. The full J's manuscript is in a cedar box in Aksum behind church walls and government restriction. Anomaly G7 has been logged. No excavation permit has been granted. JE 89289 is in basement storage. JE 98944 is catalogued as decorative funerary art. The field notes saying otherwise are in a separate archive with no cross-reference flag. The sequence the ancient authors described is not a metaphor. It is a physical checklist. 7 of the 9 items are verifiable, documented, and currently being monitored by satellite instruments, seismic arrays, and ornithological survey teams who are not reading the same source material. The 8th is the aurora anomaly. The 9th is the state of the magnetosphere right now. Torn. The fire from beyond reaching the ground. That phrase does not describe a future event in the tablet's grammar. It describes what was already happening when the author wrote it down. Enoch was told the door at the bottom of the ocean would not be opened until the judgment. He did not say it would never be opened. The door has no handle on the outside. It can only be opened from within. Whatever is inside has been watching from behind sealed limestone, under dark basalt, inside a structure built before the ocean floor above it was formed. It was there when the counting of years began. It knows what the 9 signs mean. The ancient authors did their job. They wrote it down. They sealed it in stone. They preserved it across 17 centuries of suppression and translation loss. They left the assembled picture for the generation that would recognize the parts. The question they leave on the table is simple. When all 9 signs are present, verified, and sitting in separate databases that no institution has formally connected, who notices? Because the ancient authors were very clear on one thing. The generation that sees all 9 does not get another one after it.